Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Making Waves at Sea Level. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this podcast. As many of you know, I started this show in 2014, long before every single celebrity had their own podcast. And the first couple of years, it was a top-ranked business podcast. And then, every single celebrity came in and took over all those top ranks. But I still continued to do the podcast. The last couple of years, this show has been on hiatus because I took on a role leading the Austin Technology Council and started the podcast for ATC called Austin Tech Connect. That is a weekly show where we interview leaders in the Austin tech community to talk about ways that they have seen the Austin community change and any advice they have for people who are trying to grow companies. But I was recently inspired to get back on the bus, driving Making Waves at Sea Level. And so I've been doing a bunch of solo episodes, and I've been talking lately that we're going to start doing more interviews. So this is the first in the series of interview shows as we bring Making Waves at Sea Level back to its weekly dominance of being a great show for people to listen to if you want to make some waves in business. And today, we're going to talk about sales. We have with us today Chris Bussing. He is an outbound sales trainer, a coach, and a speaker, and he is the founder of the Tech Sales Accelerator, which we'll learn a little bit about. And Chris is a really good guy. I've known him for a long time. He left his tech job to go full-time in trying to help salespeople and sales teams really be able to excel to brand new levels. And I think if you're leading a company and you're not paying attention to sales, how sales works, what salespeople need, you're leaving money on the table. And I don't think anybody listening wants to leave money on the table. So Chris Bussing, welcome to the show.
Tom, it's time to make some waves. Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have you here. I know that you do your own sales-oriented podcast, and so we're going to put you in the interviewee chair instead of the interviewer chair. But why don't you tell us a little bit about how your sales career got started?
I realized early on when I was in college, although I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, I knew two things about myself. I loved people and I wanted to be great, whatever that meant. And sales ended up being the perfect path to get paid to build relationships with awesome people. And I'm not just talking with prospects that become customers, but also your own teammates at your company, your leadership. And so it's been such an amazing path to that end, building relationships. And the be great part, I just feel like sales stretches you as a person. It gets you out of your comfort zone. You got to pick up a phone and interrupt a stranger's day, particularly a stranger who's a C-level executive who probably is a little smarter than you and has some more experience, but you still got to figure it out and figure out how to resonate. And by the way, that's something I've become really passionate about, is how to resonate in messaging with C-levels to get more meetings with the accounts that could change your quarter, year, and career. But that's how I ended up, stumbling upon sales. I found a path to align my love for people, my ambition, my drive to a great path. It's been so rewarding. And practically speaking, I met a recruiter, Sean, at a career fair at Georgetown, and he came from Oracle and shook his hand, and that shook up my career, and the rest is history. It's been 10 years at Oracle, Google Cloud, a startup, and now I'm an entrepreneur helping other sellers be more successful and working with companies to improve their outbound.
So, it's interesting working for a couple of large brands and then working for kind of a scrappy little startup. What's something that you've seen in the business world, having been on both sides of that, that sometimes maybe the C-suite of a company doesn't realize, but someone sitting in a chair does when it comes to whether it's a big brand or whether it's somebody working for a startup? What was one of your experiences on both sides, large and small, that maybe you wish the C-suite understood for being an individual contributor?
Yeah. Being at a big company, it's really nice to be able to ride the coattails of an amazing brand and a lot of marketing firepower. So when I was at Oracle, I was able to drop the Oracle name, and the cold call opener was much simpler. And a lot of times it was very warm, because imagine Oracle's different business units. So I'm able to leverage, say a prospect is invested in NetSuite, and we acquired them, and I'm selling the Oracle database. I can reference that. I could say, hey, Tom, it's Chris calling from Oracle. Just wanted to appreciate your partnership on the NetSuite side of the house. And I'm reaching out to expand our relationship on the database side. I wanted to share a few stories of how we're helping similar customers. I'm curious, do you have 20 minutes next week to talk with your dedicated team? And so, you can reference it. You just make it really warm. Like when I was at Google, it was similar. If I reached out to a prospect and I did my homework and I found out they invested in Google Ads, I could call that out and just create that context. I appreciate your partnership on the ad side. I'm reaching out to expand on the Google Cloud side of things. Now, with a startup, you might not have that brand recognition. So if anything, and I think my leadership recognized this at my last company, but it's friggin' hard, to you really have to be scrappy and you have to be creative. And I would do things like borrow the social proof of our partners. So I didn't have the Oracle name or the Google name, but at my last company, we were an AWS partner, so I was able to reference that in my opener. Hey, it's Chris calling from Bespin, top global AWS services partner. And I would actually not only have to get creative with leveraging other forms of social proof from our partners, but try and get more creative on warm introductions in general. And when I open cold calls, I definitely have to be a little more mindful, and I'd start to break out things like the permission-based opener where I'd say, I probably caught you in the middle of something. So before I go any further, do you have a minute for me to share why I'm reaching out to you specifically? And so that permission-based opener works when you're cold calling on behalf of any company, but I feel like at Oracle, I could be just a little more assumptive. And I didn't always have to break that out. It could be just very matter of fact. So, I mean, that's just one little nuance in terms of how you might adapt how you open cold calls and conversations. But I'm sure there's other thoughts that could come to mind as we talk, but that's just one thing off the top of my head.
Sure. And I want to go a little deeper on where I was going. As an individual contributor working for these companies, what do you wish your senior management knew about what it was to be a salesperson?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real grind, and as you can imagine, and you're doing the same mundane tasks over and over with almost no return. A lot of times you're just getting radio silence, and I think there are good leaders though that can empathize with that. And I remember at Google Cloud, I had a leader, Chris, that he really he communicated to us and acknowledged us that like what you're doing is extremely hard. We're third in the market behind AWS and Microsoft. And guys, I get you, it's a struggle, but we gotta pick it up. So maybe, I think that was a good example of a leader being empathetic of the grind. And one of the hardest things in business is to generate new business with a customer that spends nothing with you, let alone if you are at a startup with no brand recognition, that's even tougher. So I've had some meetings that I'm proud to have gotten. Like one of my most glorious meetings was after 3 years of reaching out. And obviously we need to get results on shorter time frames, but I've had examples of deals that came after 9 months of radio silence, and it can feel thankless along the way. So just getting some acknowledgement from leadership and recognition of maybe the activity that is being put in to try and produce the results that ultimately we need to produce.
And that's a really good answer, and a good thing for everybody in a leadership role to remember is it might be a long time since you were in that position, and being able to be a little bit empathetic and pay attention to what they go through on the daily basis. And I know, having been in sales many, many years ago, the game has changed. Technology has brought a whole new layer to sales that didn't exist 30 years ago. And so a lot of people in the leadership realm who might have come up through sales don't even realize what it's like on a day-to-day basis to carry a bag. But you talked about something in your answer that really struck with me, and that was being able to get the appointment, right? Being able to get them. So what are some tips you have for people to be able to get a meeting with anybody? Because I think this is something that every boss wants to hear, every C-suite person wants to hear, is how the heck can I get my salespeople motivated knowing that they can get that appointment? So, that's something you were really good at when you were at Oracle, was, getting the door open and getting those appointments. What are your tips for people on getting appointments with anybody?
Yep, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But one other thought that might be helpful to leaders is I've noticed the great leaders, including at my last company where I was at a startup with no brand recognition, they were willing to get in the trenches themselves and be vocal about it. So not just empathizing with their sellers, but my last CEO, he told us about how he would make calls. He would shake up his VC network, and he was hustling. And so the best leaders know that nothing is beneath them, and by modeling the behavior of prospecting themselves, even if you're a CEO of a company, or maybe at a really big company, could be a sales executive. That can go a long way and really win over your people, man, and get them to want to fight for you. So I just had to throw that in there. But in terms of getting a meeting with anyone, let's talk about it. We can get into a formula for irresistible messaging that gets C-levels even in the stingiest accounts that are ingrained with our competitors to bite and take a meeting and explore an opportunity. However, I will say maybe it's not worth getting a meeting with anyone. One thing I learned at my past company, selling at a startup where the world is my oyster, and I could do deals, and I did do deals across the country, even did some deals in different countries. All opportunities are not equal. And there are some prospects that if we win them over, they're going to be miserable customers, especially if you're a startup. You can't afford to bring on bad customers that complain so much, and the support costs are more than the profit you make from the customer. So I just want leaders to think about enabling their teams to really prioritize the right accounts, helping educate sellers on what good looks like. What does the ideal client look like? And of course, good companies have good websites with case studies, but really sharing data internally on here are our most profitable customers. These are the top industries. These are some of their other characteristics in terms of their size and employee. It could be revenue, employee count. Here's what their tech stack looks like. It depends on what you're selling, but there's certain nuances you're going to want to look like. And all sellers should know this is what good looks like. And ideally, it's eventually very mature sales organizations focus on sellers that are aligned to specific verticals. But even if you're at a startup, you could maybe pick a couple verticals to in that the ICP could live in that space. And you want the sellers to understand what are the whales, like the monsters that could change our quarter, year, and career? Because whale hunting is, I mean, that's exciting in sales, and that's what actually moves the needle in business. What do the dolphins look like? The mid-size accounts, the thousands of customers that should be doing business with you that fit your ideal client profile. They have those characteristics and they can move the needle, but of course, they're not as big as the whales. So, what do the whales and dolphins look like? And how can you give your sellers lists and targets, or at least empower them to find the whales and dolphins and focus on those? And help them understand what the minnows look like. These are the small accounts that, as telling you before, it's a waste of time to go after the minnows. It's actually very costly. So avoid those like the plague. And by the way, help the sales team one more thing when it comes to targeting, because targeting is actually comes before the messaging. Understand and help the sales team understand what are the triggers or changing dynamics in these whale and dolphin accounts worlds that introduce a need for our solution. When I used to sell cloud migration, if I saw a company make an acquisition, oh, great. That means they're going to have to consolidate infrastructure. They're going to have to migrate. They might need some help. That's time to pounce. And there's other examples of triggers, Tom, but an organization should empower their people to know those triggers. And maybe that happens in the onboarding process. So yeah, targeting is
So,
important.
so that's interesting. I just recently was at a conference, and one of the speakers that I saw in a breakout session that was about sales, she had where you have three with a whale and a dolphin and a minnow. She had five. She ranked them like going to college. She had A, B, C, D, and F.
Oh,
And basically, what she did was she worked with her outbound salespeople. She was a small business, and they came up with a formula to identify who was an A, who was a B, who was a C, D, and F, and they only prospect to A's and B's. Everybody else
mm,
they don't do. And they took their prospecting number of outbound calls to getting a meeting. They took it like, the percentage was like ridiculous. By getting rid of the C's,
mm.
D's, and F's who weren't the right fit for her, or who didn't have the money, or who weren't committed to what she was selling, was a great thing. So being able to identify, I think that's really good advice to be able to do that. And in your case, don't pay attention to the minnows, because you're just going to suck up a lot of time and probably not make money on them. But getting back to the original question, and that
Yeah,
is, what does it take
yeah,
to
yeah,
be able to get that appointment with those whales and dolphins, to be able to
exactly.
get that? What does a
Yeah,
salesperson have to do?
I had to set that stage, but you get a meeting with a whale and a dolphin. And I'll summarize it. I'll try and do it in one sentence and then we can unpack it. If you have a whale, for example, you want to reach out to decision makers who could execute on implementing technology and sign off on it. Influencers, it could be middle managers and directors who can influence a buying decision, and end users. So you want to reach out to decision makers, influencers, and end users across channels. Like you want a balanced outbound approach, just like you want a balanced investment portfolio. That's what's going to give you a return. So when I say across channels, You pick up the phone and make a call. And if they don't pick up, you leave a voicemail saying you're going to send an email, and you send that personalized value driven email. And then you send the LinkedIn request with a personal touch referencing you sent the email, and the voicemail and LinkedIn request pointing to the email statistically increase the response rate probability from the email. So you reach out, and I'm kind of breaking it down as I go, but to decision makers, influencers, end users across channel, the phone, email, and LinkedIn, with messaging that is consistently personalized, relevant, value driven. And you do that week over week over the course of 6 to 9 months, all the while building your strategic network with the partners of the prospect and the end users internally at the prospect that can shape your messaging from the inside and eventually refer you into the right people. What a
Interesting.
power pack statement. And I'm actually
No,
doing a YouTube on that. And part of what I work with companies on and individuals that I coach is unpacking that. And we could, Thom, pick out, like, I love talking about great messaging that's personalized, relevant, value driven. That's one part of it. But if you want, we can pick apart different aspects of that sentence. But man, is that a doozy.
no, I mean, I actually think that you covered enough on that. I want to go to the next question was, what does it take then for salespeople to reach their full potential, right? You've got this idea of, okay, you can get a meeting with anybody. You've got the support of your bosses, and they know how to roll up their sleeves and get involved. But we all know that a lot of salespeople wash out in this tech world right now. I know a whole bunch of people who are being pushed out because they're not meeting quotas. How can a salesperson reach their full potential?
Yeah. And Thom, I have to say, if we can get to it, I do want to talk messaging. I love messaging, but let's talk about reaching your full potential. 10 years ago, when I started out as an SDR at Oracle, I'll never forget when my boss pulled me into a tiny conference room in Oracle's Burlington office. He looks me dead in the eyes after a period of what felt like an eternal silence. And he tells me, Chris, how does it feel to be last? I was the last, like, lowest performer on my SDR team just out of college, and I thought I'm already screwing things up. And I blurted out like I guess the inner tiny toddler in me just reacted with justifications, which is something I still struggle with to this day, honestly, trying to prove myself. But I said, I don't even care. I don't even think I'm passionate about sales. And those are not the words you say to your first boss if you're trying to build a career. But then, Jarrell, that manager, and shout out to Jarrell, he might be at AWS now. He smiled as if he knew something I didn't. And I know he did. Like, that sentence was crafted and cut like the perfect key to unlock a part of me that hated losing more than I liked winning. And so I remember going home that night, and a chip was forming on my shoulder, and I was scheming. I was like, I am going to prove my boss wrong, and I'm going to become number one. And so what I did is I got in early the next day to the office, and I leaned in. And leaning in fully to the opportunity in front of us, that's the key to unlocking our potential. And so what that actually looked like, if we break it down, is one, investing in your knowledge and just being a voracious learner, following your curiosity. And for me, tactically, I started reading books on sales methodology to give me a baseline approach to all types of sales situations. That's what a methodology does. And Oracle is known to be an elite sales organization, and something sales teams and organizations can learn from them is they implemented the Sandler sales methodology. And so one of the books I read was a book on the Sandler sales methodology. You can't teach a kid to ride a bike at a seminar, but imagine this methodology was dispersed across the sales organization, and there was a standard approach to how you would outbound and run discovery calls and progress sales cycles. And so there's something to be a lesson to be learned for individuals. To one, if your company doesn't share a methodology with you, and encourage one, read books and figure out one that you could use as the basis for your approach to all types of sales situations. And two, good companies, they will implement some type of methodology as a foundation for their sellers, and give them a little training in it. But so that was one key to unlocking the potential, right? Is just being highly curious and starting to read more and learn. Number two, I don't know why I'm using these fingers, but is to invest in relationships. My mentor, Thom Singer,
I've met
Eric, he
that
says
guy.
he says
Yeah.
all opportunities are tied to people. And what that looked like in the context of my role is I started investing in my relationship with my manager. And the more I leaned into that relationship, the more my manager leaned in to support me. I leaned into the relationships with my account executive mentors. These are the senior sellers. And they started to open up, sharing their tricks of the trade and tactics that worked. And one thing you learn is the best sales artists steal, they don't reinvent the wheel. So I started to be curious about what was working for them and steal their approaches and then replicate it to produce success. Now, there's a couple more components of leaning in fully to reach your potential. Another is preparation. Oh my gosh, preparation is everything. We saw at the National Speakers Association, it was Ty Bennett, and he said, based on his research on high performance, and he's one of the best in the world, he said preparation is key. And so, as a seller, that preparation might look like building your target list for your whales and dolphins and the right personas, the decision makers, end users, and influencers you'll reach out to, and doing that on the weekend. I'd actually do that if you really want to reach your potential. Do that on Sunday so you're ready to rock when you enter into your prospecting block on Monday. And another part of preparation is you're practicing your talk tracks. You built a script, which we walk through a cold call script if we want, and you practice it. You've even practiced the objections you might get, like, I'm not interested. We're with XYZ competitor. And so by the time you're in that cold calling block, not only do you have your contact information and you can execute, but you're not caught practicing on the court when the prospect picks up and hits you with an objection. And the final piece, Thom, of reaching your potential, although I'm sure I could come up with other nuances to it, is playing the numbers game and having a bias for action. You know, in business, we need to fail forward and we collect feedback. But what I realized and I learned quickly as an SDR is the more calls you make, the more opportunities you have to have conversations. And our guy, Mark Hunter, who I met through you, so thank you, Thom. He's been on my podcast and he's had me on his, and he's a top keynote speaker in sales in my space. He says selling is having conversations. And so the more dials you make, the more opportunities for conversations and the more opportunities to generate opportunities and the more pipeline to close potential business. So I trusted in the almighty law of averages early on as a seller, and it really worked out for me. So those are some of the keys to reaching your potential as a seller.
Nice. So you recently went all in full time with the Sales Tech Accelerator. And so why don't you tell everybody exactly what's involved with your business and tell us a little bit about your speaking and your coaching.
Yeah, I've been doing a podcast for years now, and funny enough, when I was in my Oracle class of training, which was the cohort out of college, they called it class of, and you're with 100 SDRs, this class clown, Brad Mank, said, "Hey, question boy." And I was that guy that asked too many questions. And hey, I leaned into the inner question boy and followed my curiosity, which, okay, Thom, I have to say that is another key to reaching your potential in sales. I'm going to go on a quick tangent. Asking the right questions and being curious to understand the prospect in their world, that's what really matters. Because I will never forget when I came out of Oracle training on an encryption like security add-on to our database. I thought all of a sudden I was a security expert, and I call a chief information security officer and I jump into confidently what I know about our products, and he hung up on me. It doesn't matter how smart we are or what we know. What matters is being curious and empathizing. It's all about the prospect. So that curiosity is a key piece. But going back to the story, I'm going to bring us back. Brad calls me question boy. I was a little embarrassed, but I leaned into it. And I just always was curious and asking questions. So question boy, he followed his curiosity, and he ended up getting a closing role in his first six figures in 1 year at Oracle. And I was 23 and I didn't know what to do with myself. I was buying my whole team coffees, which was kind of irresponsible. There's a team of 15 people. On Friday, I'd buy them coffees every Friday. And so what happened though is I'm on the sales floor as a closer. And then Thom, somebody says, Chris, you should have a podcast. And so the world gives you some signals, doesn't it? And so here I am now. I've done 160 podcasts over a few years. I've asked over 2,000 questions to top leaders and speakers like yourself, and I'm just getting started. Question Boy is just getting going. So to tie it in, I'm proud of this. Maybe we call it a media arm I'm building with this podcast. I bring on top authors, speakers, and leaders. And it's useful not just for individual contributors, but for sales leaders. I just had CRO Kevin Dorsey on recently, top CRO in the industry. Anyways.
So wait, before we go on to the rest of your business, how do people find your podcast?
Yeah, and you could tell I'm passionate. I could go on and on about it because I put 4+ years into it. People can look up Chris Bussing on YouTube. It's a combination of the podcast that stands on the shoulders of some of the best in the industry, and we have great conversations. And then I have my own videos, like I'll drop a video on how do you even specific things like I notice people are searching for, like how do you ask for a meeting in a cold email? How do you open a cold call? Like, and so I'm putting out outbound related content. Now, also, I'm proud of the stuff I'm putting out on LinkedIn. I post every day. And the reality is, Thom, the way YouTube and LinkedIn fit into my business, it's an amazing marketing engine and an amazing tool to connect with great people. So people can check out Chris Bussing on YouTube and Chris Bussing on LinkedIn. Now, Tech Sales Accelerator has been coaching up a range of people to help launch their career. I do have some people they're transitioning into tech sales, and some of these people I'm getting are entrepreneurs that some of them have built 6-figure to 7-figure businesses, but they have families and they're looking for a little more stability and with a big upside. And so that's interesting to see some entrepreneurs making the pivot. But I work with SDRs who are at top companies like Google, even Databricks. I'm trying to think like Zoom Info, big tech, also the startup world, and I'm coaching them on how to break into any account and basically unpacking that sentence I gave you that encapsulates outbound. I'm also working with closers at companies like Splunk and other top companies where they also need to not just they need to outbound as well to be successful. Finally, I have been speaking to companies like Zoom Info. I'm very proud to have spoken to 160 SDRs on basically how to get meetings. But Zoom Info wanted me to focus a little more on cold calling specifically. I spoke to Absorb LMS, a learning and management software company, and they wanted me to talk a little more about follow-ups and LinkedIn social selling. A lot of it falls under the guise of how do you open up, meetings with the whales and the dolphins that move the revenue needle. And I spoke to a Series D SaaS company called Workspan, and not just to their SDRs, but account executives, customer success team, and their customer engineers. We didn't just talk about getting in the door, but building relationships where your customers, they never want to leave you. And they're just, in fact, they become your personal walking ambassadors that want to find more ways to grow the business with you. So that's what I'm building in a nutshell. It might sound like a lot, but if anything, you could tell what underpins it all is I love outbound, I love sales and helping people reach their potential.
And you've also created an online course. Is that right?
Yeah, so in Tech Sales Accelerator pairs a course with one-to-one coaching with me. And I do have a bench of coaches that I can hover in, and some of them have led enablement at Oracle. Some of them have made 7 figures out in the real world at data and AI startup. Some of them are coming from Google. One guy in my network that I hover in as a coach, he's covered he currently does cover the largest AI account at Google Cloud. So one thing, Thom, I have to say, and you are Mr. Networker, is I bring in my network to help my members, as I call them, and I'm coaching that are SDRs and AEs in tech sales. I also leverage it for companies that I consult and speak to and train on the sales side, where I can broker introductions to potential prospects. For a startup, I can broker an intro to a venture capital firm. And I'm proud of that. And one thing I'm proud of, and you know these guys, I think, but I even introduced 2 founders that started a company. So I love to, like yourself, leverage my network to foster connection and open doors.
Well, and I mean, one of the big things that I talk a lot about is, in this world where we're getting more and more digital, more and more tech, everything's getting taken over. And we have a whole younger generation who, just wants to work from home and be on their computer and hustle all day. And it's not that they're not getting the work done, but they just want to, bury it. We've got to have more human interaction, and we've got to
Yes.
look for more ways to collaborate because, throughout the history of man, very few people have accomplished anything all by themselves. And when we really double down on collaboration, figuring out who are those key people and figuring out ways to do things win-win and not keeping score. Sometimes when you collaborate, the other person's going to get 70% of the benefit. And I talk to people all the time who are like, well, I only want to do that if I'm going to collaborate with somebody and I'm going to get 70% of the benefit. I talked to a young woman who was, and I'm using air quotes here if you're listening to the audio, an influencer. She didn't have that many followers, but she acted
Yeah.
like she did. And she wanted to know about like being on podcasts because she was getting asked to be on a lot of podcasts as a guest. And she goes, but I don't want to be on podcasts with these little people who don't have a lot of followers. I just want to be on the really big shows with people who are bigger than me because that will help me. And I said, well, sometimes you have to, when you collaborate on a project, the other person, because she goes, my name would bring more to them. And she goes, I don't give anyone my name. I get the benefit. And
Mm,
I've secretly followed her since then. And she's not really become any more than she was because she was keeping score on collaboration and wanting to make sure that she had 51% or more every time she collaborated. And I don't know. What about you? I just think that hurts you in the world of trying to build a business or a company.
yeah, you're someone I have tremendous respect and admiration for, because you are always collaborating with people and lifting others up, including those that on paper might not be able to do much for you. Like you really care about people. And I think that's just something that you've rubbed off on me and you've helped me realize what matters at the end of the day. But what you said, you just shared of that perspective of that woman, that, I mean, that made me want to cringe. And that's a great non-example of how you don't want to be. And I had this guy reach out to have me on his podcast, and you know what, he's an aspiring podcaster, and and I just feel like you even reminded me I should reach out to him and see how he's doing, you know. And also it's what an honor to have people reach out to us, even you know, and want to collaborate. So at the end of the day, I think, you know, in the book Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, it talks about win-win and synergy, and we all go further together.
So that book changed my life. I'm old enough to have read it when it first came out.
What a book.
You probably weren't born, but I read it in the early 1990s when the book first came out, and that was a life changer. And it holds up today. The seven habits are still super important for people today. So Chris, as we wrap this up, what do you wish everybody knew about sales that they don't know?
What I wish everyone knew is that although it can suck, we talked about that earlier, it's a grind. It can be thankless. You're calling people, you have experienced radio silence, you experience rejection, you fail. But if you can lean into the opportunity, like we talked about earlier, and give it all you got and keep being pleasantly persistent and following up, even when there's no indication that success is going to come, like that's a superpower that can change your future. And you can cultivate that in sales. And in fact, sales more broadly can be used as a vehicle to personal transformation. And unlocking a more courageous side of you, a more persistent side of you, a more empathetic side of you, a more influential side of you that can make a bigger difference, not just for yourself, but for others and for your community. So, personal transformation through tech sales, baby. That's what I stand for.
So, Chris, if somebody's listening and their company needs someone to help consult their sales team, they're looking for a speaker for their sales kickoff, how do they find you?
So for speaking and training specifically for companies, I do have a dedicated website beyond Tech Sales Accelerator. That's chrisbussing.com. And it lays out some of the challenges that I, you know, help companies with when it comes to getting more meetings, generating pipeline. Big tech companies might be trying to take a new product to market, and they need to enable their people to do that. They might be pivoting a sales team who is a victim of affluence where they had inbound and now they need to become hunters. Or it could be an early stage startup that needs to punch above their weight class. They don't have the brand recognition, but they need to figure out how to get in conversations and seated at tables that they're typically not at. And so the website kind of articulates that, but chrisbussing.com. They also could email me at chris@bussingventures.com. I don't know why I'm laughing, but and then DM me on LinkedIn. That oh, LinkedIn, what a platform. And I do want to connect with more people and have more meaningful conversations, which is what it's all about.
Awesome. Well, Chris Bussing, thanks for being a guest here on Making Waves at Sea Level. Any last words?
Well, Tom, as you said, all opportunities are tied to people. And I think, you know, it's easy to get caught up on financial wealth, but what about connection wealth? Like there's no wealthier person than the person like yourself whose kids love spending time with them, whose business partners love spending time with them, and who's lifting others up. So all opportunities are tied to people, my friend. Thank you for being an inspiration.
Awesome. Thanks for being a guest on the show. And thanks to everybody who tuned in and listened. We're trying to come back with more interviews on the show. So if you have ideas, you can always let me know. I'm just Thom, Thom, at thomsinger.com. You can find me on all the socials, just Thom Singer, with don't forget the H. And we'll be back next week with another interview with somebody just as interesting as Chris Bussing. I know you're thinking, how will you ever find somebody just as interesting? But we'll figure it out. We'll see you next week here on Making Waves at Sea Level.